Sports, 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 sports.
This week, we are talking hockey, specifically the Chicago Blackhawks. And I couldn't think of a better person to bring on than my good friend, Aaron Schweitzer. How's it going?
I am thrilled to talk about hockey because I don't frequently get to do so with people outside of like my life that I mostly talk hockey at instead of
Mhm.
with.
Right. So we are, I mean, given that like basketball is kind of roughly around the quarter mark of the season, hockey-ish rounding out
We're
around
about a
that.
third. Yep.
Yeah. So we'll start with this. Well, actually, let's start with Chicago Blackhawks off season. Do you
Yeah.
have any highlights of anything that happened in the off season that you're like, huh, okay, that seemed like a good move, or boy, what happened? What made us decide to do that?
I think actually, Mike, one of the things that's really interesting is this team, especially if you look at the standings or the stats or whatnot, like, or even just read about what's going on. It sounds abysmal, but on paper, it is worse than it actually is. And I have faith in the ownership and the general manager. And that's going to be a big thing that I'll circle back to. There's a lot that I like that they're doing. It's a rough time being a Chicago sports fan in general. Like I think I saw a stat the
Yeah.
other day that was like over the past like 15 months, every single head coach has been fired from every single like professional Chicago organization except for the Bulls, and everybody's like, and he should have been fired like
He's
like
definitely his time is coming due. If it's
probably like over an 18-month span, like every single Chicago, like because Matt Eberflus was fired from the Bears, and the Chicago Fire fired the head coach, the WNBA fired their head coach, obviously Pedro Grifol from the White Sox, and David Ross from the Cubs, and then most recently Luke Richardson of the Blackhawks. But here's the thing is on paper this looks a lot worse than it actually is. The Blackhawks were never supposed to be great this season. So, in a word, they're still disappointing, but the best this team was ever going to be was competing for a wild card spot, and the worst this team was going to be where they are now. We were hoping they were going to be a little bit higher, but like it is not fun being a Chicago sports fan, but I got to imagine that it's a worse time being a Nashville Predators fan this year, who are statistically, in terms of standings, as bad as the Blackhawks. The difference is the Blackhawks tore down a team and are in a rebuild, much like the Bears. Recent first overall pick, and in that process of like building a team around them and everything. And so, very similar stages of a rebuild for them. I think the Bears are a little bit farther off than the Blackhawks are, debatable. But Nashville was a wild card bubble team who signed the three most coveted free agents last year: Steven Stamkos, Brady Shea, and Jonathan Marchessault, and have just been abysmal this year, while also having a top five goalie in the league with UC Saros, who's just underperformed this year. So it's like it's bad, but we were never supposed to be great. Nashville was supposed to compete for the cup this year and is going to be competing for for a number one overall pick.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
I
So,
look as far as
okay.
the offseason goes, Kyle Davidson's the general manager. We had the second overall pick. I just like what he's doing because he is 2 years ago, like when he got the job, he was like, we need to tear it all down before we can build back up. That's how sports work. We're not in a position to compete right now. We got to stop pretending that we are. So you trade away Alex DeBrincat, which hurts, but you get a seventh overall pick for him, which winds up being Kevin Korchinski, who looks to be a stud. And you trade away Kirby Doc, who is like not going to fit our rebuild plans anyway in terms of timeline, and he's got injury concerns, he's got confidence issues, and he's still got some of those issues, but he might be really good for Montreal. But we traded him for the 15th overall pick and wound up getting Frank Nazar for him, and I'd much rather have Frank Nazar than Kirby Doc. So it's one of those where it's like it hurt a little bit, especially now seeing how Kirby Doc was drafted third overall behind Jack Hughes and Capo Caco, but sixth overall was Dylan Cousin, who is tearing it up in Buffalo. And it's like, man, we could have had him instead. But it's like, you just don't know because the Rangers just traded Capo Caco for way less than we traded Kirby Doc for. So it was a good call. And then we wound up getting Toronto's first round pick for taking on the Peter Mrazek contract. And he's been a really solid goaltender for us. And with that first overall pick, we got Sam Renzel, who is playing at the University of Minnesota this year. And Mike, as a defenseman, I don't know if you've heard of Sam Renzel, but get used to hearing his name. He was always meant to be a long-term defenseman project. He's playing for the University of Minnesota this year as a sophomore, and he has 20 points in 20 games as a
Oh, wow.
defenseman. He's going to be a stud. It is going to look like a steal getting him at 25th or 27th overall or whatever we got him at. This kid should have gone in the top 10 probably, but because we always knew he was a couple years away. That so that was all a couple years ago. The Blackhawks still just like they didn't make enough moves last year. They weren't deep enough of a team. They got injury. They at one point they had more money on the injured reserve than they did on their actual roster, which is just insane. They were not built to compete last year. They get the second overall pick. They drafted Artem Levshinov, who's going to be a really stud defenseman, but defensemen take time to develop. He's playing in the AHL this year. But like that was the big news. But he's a right shot defenseman, and right shot defensemen are about the most coveted position in the NHL. So even if he doesn't turn out, somebody's going to try to take a reclamation project on him and overpay for him or whatnot. But he's going to turn out. He's going to be good. Just be patient. And meanwhile, let him sit in Rockford and develop and just dominate down there. He also had an injury to start the year, so that doesn't help things. But Kyle Davidson also made a couple key moves this offseason that I thought really helped the team. He signed Tyler Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen to free agent contracts. He also signed Alec Martinez, who I was a big fan of the signing for a 1-year deal, so he can be flipped at the deadline. A proven veteran that can bring some good experience to this team. And I wasn't thrilled at the TJ Brody signing, and that hasn't panned out well. But he also signed the best backup goalie on the market, Lawrence Brossoit, who hasn't played yet this year because he's been injured. So that should also be taken into consideration with the Blackhawks this year, that they've been playing with Soderblom, who's been better than expected, but is not ready for the NHL right now. And and we've got talent. It's gonna take a minute for them to come in, and it's gonna take a minute for them to be the talent that we like. And the other thing that Davidson did is he made Nick Foligno the captain officially over the summer, which was a right call. He's certainly leading the locker room, so why not make it official? Oh, and the one other thing that I'll mention is that even though there was a lot of talk about whether we should have drafted Ivan Demidov instead of Artem Levshinov, Team Levshinov, and the reason is right shot defensemen are so hard to come across. And then people always overpay for them in trades or free agency. If you can get a stud one at 2 overall, you take him. And Demidov, I'm sure, will also be a stud for Montreal. But Davidson tried to trade for him last year. It was announced the day after the draft that Kyle Davidson offered Montreal a trade package that would have, or offered Columbus, because Columbus picked. They offered a trade package to, I think, Columbus because Columbus picked one pick before Montreal, and Columbus just didn't accept it. But included in that was a 2025 unconditional first round draft pick from the Blackhawks, so they could draft Demidov as well. So I think Davidson is making all the right moves. It just is going to take some time to see all this pan out. So there's your very long-winded answer. I'm very positive about this team despite the standings. I'm very positive about where this is going. We are where we should be in a rebuild right now.
I think that's a perfect way to put it. We are where we should be in a rebuild, which we're not supposed to be great right now by any stretch of the imagination. And as long as we're seeing progress with the team, we should be in good shape. That is, and you're asking sports fans to be patient, which that's just a recipe for disaster with sports fans because we, by our very nature, are not very patient individuals, which sucks because something like a rebuild, especially what the Blackhawks and the Bears have been trying to do, tear it to the studs and try to build something from the ground up, similar to what other teams in the past have done before. It's going to take time, and
Yep.
there should be a level of patience, and more importantly, there should be a level of grace that needs to be given with a lot of these players, the front office, and just go from there.
Well, look, it's there are four players on this team that matter, and everybody else doesn't, and that's just the harsh truth. The four players on this team that matter, are obviously Connor Bedard, who, look, I know you said he's having a down year earlier, but he's finding his groove.
Mhm.
He's done really well these last couple days under the new coach. So, like, also, I was a fan of Luke Richardson. There was a lot to be blamed on the roster last year, but he had a better chance and was performing at the same pace. And you can already tell over the last couple of games since he was removed from his position, the team has just played better. They've played better. They've scored more. They've looked better. They're more fun to watch. So either way, I wouldn't worry about Connor Bedard is going to be fine. He's going to be
Oh yeah.
what we thought he was going to be. I'm not worried about him at all. He matters. Frank Nazar matters, and he is probably going to end up where we thought he would be. If not, maybe even a little bit better than what we initially projected. And then Kevin Korchinski matters, and he is still developing. He started off in the AHL this year, and they already called him up, and he's playing well. And if they have to send him back down, okay, he's 21 years old. He might actually, I think he's 20. He'll be fine. So those would be the three, and then Alex Vlasic, who had a breakout season last year, and then we signed to a 6-year contract at the end of that. So like, and he's playing really well, kind of this defenseman that came out of nowhere. So like
Mhm.
those four matters. Everybody else kind of doesn't, as much as that hurts to say, because like Bertuzzi, Teravainen, Taylor Hall, Nick Foligno, all great guys to have on this roster. They're eventual trade pieces. They're or eventual like out of respect because you're the captain, we're not going to trade you or something. But there's a good chance Taylor Hall gets traded at the deadline because he's a former first overall pick and he's kind of getting his groove back this season. Bertuzzi and Teravainen have 4-year contracts. We're not going to be competing for a cup within 4 years. And if we are, they're going to be third or fourth liners because of their age. You'd like to see Lucas Reichel developing, but it just seems less likely that's going to happen. So I don't know. In the meantime, you kind of look at some of these reclamation projects as well. Ilya Mikheyev, who we acquired in the offseason from the Canucks, who had a down season last season, but he also came off of an MCL surgery. You don't bounce back from those for a year or two. He started off the season not so great. He used to be the fastest skater in the NHL, and he's certainly lost a step. You do that when you have leg surgery, but
Mhm.
he looks good, and especially since the coaching change. He scored like 5 goals in the last 5 games. He's producing really well. Philip Kurashev's disappointing, but whatever. He's a young guy. Maybe he bounces back. Maybe he doesn't. He still is in the top 1% of hockey players in the world just by making the NHL. So I think I see all these pieces, even like Jason Dickinson, who's a really consistent, really good player for the Blackhawks, and I love having him. He just doesn't matter because he's not going to be on this team when we're competing, and if he is, he's probably going to be that fourth line or that like healthy scratch safety. What happened when we got Jason Dickinson? Vancouver traded us a second round pick to take him, and he wound up being incredible for that. So at the very least, we got that second round pick. But simply getting him for nothing would have been better, or
Mhm.
would have been like a steal. So like you just the right people that need to be developing are. You talk about patience, right? Like with the Bears, they started to do some building and then got the first overall pick dropped in their lap 2 years in a row and chose to trade it away the first year, and it worked out well for them. I would say personally, I don't know, I'm not a huge football fan, but that seems to be a steal at this point. And then they built everything around, and then they're like, all right, we have a good enough team now. If we got a good enough quarterback, we could probably go that next level. And it's not quite worked out, but I think everybody knows where the Bears are still. We're a wild card team at best. It's the same for the Blackhawks. We're on the same pace. Two more years, and these teams will be like easy wild card, probably actual just in the standings.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. With the Bears in particular, it's just nice to see flashes of competent quarterback play.
Yeah.
And hopefully, with a coach and a system that will
Yep.
last more than a season, which that's something that you can fault the Bears for, is that this consistently happens where they bring in a quarterback, they have them learn the system, and then the next year or usually it's the off season, they fire that coach to bring in someone else, and then the quarterback needs to start from the ground up. That's that's what happened with Trubisky, that's what happened with Fields, and now it's going to happen again with Caleb Williams. And
Yes. Yep.
but I
But Williams
there's
has a better support structure around him. Justin Fields never had Keenan Allen to throw to. And Swift is still really young. And we have the best punter in all of football because he came from
yes.
Iowa.
I
And
mean, he's
yeah,
been crushing it with his punts, though.
he's
He's
killing.
doing
Torrey
really well.
Taylor's just incredible. Yeah, it's yeah.
So with it's already been mentioned that Luke Richardson got fired. I think about what, like 3 weeks ago or so.
About
It's
three.
yeah. So it's a recent thing, and then the Blackhawks named, I think, Anders Sorensen, which
Yep.
he was the coach of the Rockford Ice Hogs for before he got this interim coach tag. So talk about the Luke Richardson era in for the Blackhawks, and you've already mentioned how they're playing a little better under Sorensen. So let's start with Luke Richardson. Like, what are you going to remember from this era of Blackhawks hockey in regards to the Richardson as the coach?
Yeah, Luke Richardson will be an head coach one day. I think this is a good learning experience for him. And ultimately, he wasn't given all the tools that he needs, and
You
he
rarely are
probably
with you rarely are
yep.
in certain situations, and that's
And
fun to do.
he will wind up on top again, and he will know the right questions to ask, and he will certainly have some learning experiences from. He will be fine, and I won't look back and be like, darn it, I wish we'd have hung on to him, because I do think it was time to make that change, especially because this season's at a loss. So bring in the guy that has been coaching these guys successfully in the AHL to finish out the season, do a really long season long head coach job search,
Search, yeah.
see what's available, see what's out there, see who you can get, make your best decision. And the GM Cal Davison even said one of those things where he's like, as soon as you start to question whether or not you should let the head coach go, is the second you should fire the head coach, instead of prolonging the inevitable. You've already made it in your mind. I don't see this guy in the future, so don't hang on to him any longer. Luke Richardson would be fine. Unlike, I don't think Matt Nagy will ever be given a head coaching job in the NFL again.
Probably
Uh,
no.
I would be ridiculously surprised if Matt Eberflus does as well. So like that's like there's some differences in that. Again, I'm not a huge football guy, but Andy Reid went back to being like he's the offensive coordinator for the Chiefs, right?
Andy Reid, no, he's
Not Reid,
Matt
Nagy.
Nagy. Yeah, he's a coordinator,
He went
offensive.
back to his old position,
Yeah,
and that's
there
probably his ceiling.
and that's okay. There are plenty of head coaches out there who were coordinators who found out pretty quick, wow, I'm a really good coordinator. I'm a really bad head coach. So
Yep.
I'm just gonna go back to coordinating again.
Look, Luke Richardson will find his way as an assistant or associate coach on an NHL bench soon, if not an AHL head coach, and he will eventually find his way back up to an NHL head coach because if you look at the first season, the tanking season, that was the season where they traded DeBrincat and Kirby Doc. It was the teardown for Bedard year. He knew what the assignment was. But the thing is, you got really competitive games off of this team that was built to be the worst in the league, to get the best chance at drafting Connor Bedard. Games were fun and exciting, and we should have been blown out 7-1 every game, and instead we're losing 4-2 because of an empty net goal. Now, some of that was you still had Patrick Kane, you had sort of Jonathan Taves sometimes,
The ghost
um,
Jonathan
the
Taves, at
ghost of
least. Yeah.
Jonathan Taves, yeah, the post-COVID era stuff, and you had some talented players, offensively and defensively. But Luke Richardson got a lot of hustle out of those guys. He will be fine. Again, I don't see any of the most recent Bears head coaches getting back in a head coaching position soon. I think you look at the era and you say he wasn't equipped with the right things, and he could, and then It was one of those where he couldn't adapt because last season he was not to blame for the way our season went because Davidson admits he didn't stack the team enough. They started to get injured, and you have essentially the Rockford Ice Hogs playing in Chicago, playing against actual legit NHL teams, and just getting it handed to them because that's how it goes. So last year was one of those. It was on the GM for not stacking it deep enough. We're not going to be, but we were never supposed to be a good team last year either. This year, the expectations were raised. There's still questions. It's still not a team meant to compete super hard. It is a team meant to be in the playoff mix until the trade deadline and then just fall off the face of the earth. And but the fact that that games couldn't even get competitive is the problem. So Luke will do great. It seems to be more like he will get a team that is ready to make that next step instead of getting a building team because he did really well when there was those veterans that were coming in and trying to prove themselves versus these new guys who are coming in and trying to prove themselves, but don't have a ton of veteran experience. So the era will be remembered fondly. I think I'm sad that it didn't work out, but it it's needed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think at some point you have to say it's not working, and there's no sense in keeping you at this point for no reason.
Mhm.
So
Well, and I think, like you said, the I think it was summed up perfectly where it's like, hey, the instance that you start to think is the head coach long for this team, that's probably when you should probably cut them loose. And that's fine. It is what it is at this point because there are plenty of instances where coaches overstay their welcome and it's not working. And with a team like this, it just seems like a bad fit.
yep.
So it is what it is. And yeah, just
So here's the thing. I said I'm an optimist about this team, and even the last couple weeks have been way better watching this. Mike, can I take you back to Halloween?
yeah, let's do it.
The Blackhawks lose 2-3 to the Sharks, who just won the first overall pick in last year's draft, getting Macklin Celebrini, the worst team in the league last year, second only to first only to the Blackhawks. Blackhawks were second, Sharks were first. We lost to them on Halloween 2-3. And by all means, the Blackhawks are a better team on paper than the Sharks this year. We beat the Kings 4-3 in a shootout. The next on November 2nd, on the 3rd, we beat the Ducks 4-2, and on the 6th, we lost to the Red Wings 1-4. We lose 1-3 on the 7th. We win 2-1 in overtime on the 10th. We lose 3-1. We lose 4-1. We lose 3-2 to the Ducks, a terrible team. We somehow beat the Panthers 3-1 on November 21st. We lose 2-3 to the Flyers. We somehow win on the 27th versus the Stars 6-2. We lose 2-3 on the 29th. We lose 6-3 on the 1st. We lose 1-4 on the 2nd. And Luke Richardson's last game, we lose 2-4. Mike, what's the constant here besides those random fluke games that every team has? We can't score.
Yeah, there's low scores, particularly for the Blackhawks, and losing by multiple scores or multiple goals as well.
Most of these games, the Blackhawks aren't scoring more than 2. A lot of them are 1. Occasionally, you get the random win, but we're losing 4-1 most games, and it's not fun hockey. A lot of those games should have ended 7-1. But also, if you look at those games, they're 1-goal games. A lot of times, the Blackhawks have the lead going into the 3rd period, and we blow it. They run out of gas. They run out of energy. They run out of reason to go for the win.
Yeah.
All right. Luke Richardson takes over. Sorry, his last game was Boston, December 4th. Anders Sorensen takes over. Start listening to these numbers now. We lose 2-4 to the Jets, who are arguably the best team in the NHL right now. We beat the Rangers 2-1 in Madison Square Garden. We lose 5-4, and then we lose 1-4. We win 5-3. We win 3-2. We win 3-1. And yesterday, as we're recording this, we lose 4-6.
You're scoring more. The scoring output has definitely gone up.
It's great. It's doubled or tripled.
It's
And frankly, a lot of times against better teams. The Blackhawks losing 4 to one of the Devils was kind of a fluke. Even the game last night, losing 4-6 to the Flames. I didn't watch the game. I was working. But losing 4-6, I would lose 4-6 every game because if you can score 4, sure, your defense needs some work. And that game too was Peter Mrazek's return from injury from a couple weeks. He was gonna make some problems. But we scored 4. We like almost never scored 4 under Luke Richardson. He was a defensive minded coach, which is not a problem to have, but on a team where you really need some scoring, then he needed some help in that regard. And I'm not saying we're going to make the playoffs. I'm not saying that Anders or Anders Sorensen is going to be the coach of the future. I'm just saying that this is looking more like the team that we should have always been this season. This is meeting expectations, and man, next year with a really good head coach, because who doesn't want to go coach in Chicago, especially with Connor Bedard, and potentially another top 3 pick. Like, I know a lot of people are talking about how like John Cooper's contract is about to be up in Tampa, and everybody would want John Cooper for any team. And I think the Blackhawks could get him. So if you
There's a
get John
strong
Cooper,
strong case to be made for something like that.
yeah, it seems like the one piece that like is really like, because you look at the if I look at the forward prospect line, there's people coming. The people that we haven't seen, you're gonna hear the name Paul Ludwitsky a lot. You're gonna hear the name Samuel Savoie a lot. You're gonna hear the name who some of those other guys. There's one who's just really dominating the AHL this year. I gotta look these up.
Mhm.
And not only that, but not all these guys will pan out, and a lot of these guys also won't make the a lot of these guys won't make the jump to the NHL, but still a lot of these guys are going to be playing well. Colton Dock, Kirby Duck's younger brother, is having a really good season. Marcel is going to be an NHL regular. Samuel Savoie, I mentioned. Landon Slager is really crushing it this year. Those are going to be guys that you'll hear a lot of. Ethan Delmaster, Wyatt Kaiser, you've probably already heard a little bit of. They will continue to develop and be good. Obviously, Levshinov, I mentioned. As far as goalies, that's the one part that you don't like really have too much coming in the pipeline. Because I also mentioned Sam Renzel, some of these college guys, they're going to be really good when they make the jump. And there was also 2 players that the Blackhawks drafted in the first round this past season who are going to be studs as well. Merrick Vanacker is playing overseas this year. He's supposed to be essentially like the next Carter Verhaeghe, who's like the
Ooh.
most underrated player in hockey, and Sasha Boiver, who is dominating in his league as well. So the Blackhawks have forward depth. They have defensive depth. They're probably still going to get another really productive free agent or two, maybe even a couple trades because they've got a ton of draft capital right now. The one thing that they don't have on lockdown is goaltending. But they have Drew Comezzo in the pipeline, and they have Adam Guyon in the pipeline as well. Goalies just typically don't make the league until they're like 25, unless they're Marc-Andre Fleury or Igor Shesterkin. But sorry, I'm rambling a lot and saying a lot of names, but I think it'd be here's like the big reason why I love talking about this and want to mention all the things I do. I think if you are not a Blackhawks fan, if you don't see what's going on, it's easy to look at this and say, when will it ever be good? And I'm telling you, 2 years, maybe one with the right head coach, or with the right offseason.
Well, that this is assuming that everything falls into place for something like that.
Yeah.
So I think two years seems realistic to just even be competitive. 3 years for the team to maybe make that leap with enough consistency and hopefully with injury luck as well.
Well, the other thing too is when the Blackhawks had their big dynasty run 2010 to 2015, we gave away all of our prospects for salary cap dumps or for rental players. We traded away to Teuvo Teravainen after winning the 2015 Cup to get rid of Brian Bickle's contract. We traded away Artemi Panarin for Brandon Saad back because we were afraid we couldn't pay Panarin afterwards after his contract was up 2 years prematurely. We we gave up. I want to say it was Philip Deneau, who like had a really good season in LA and Montreal not long ago. I want to say we gave him up for a rental for Antoine Vermette in the 2015 year. We had no depth across the board, and that's why we sort of imploded as we did. the way that Kyle Davidson has set up this team is that we can build that dynasty again and have a prospect pipeline. There will always be players that are ready to come up. There are players that are ready to come up right now. Maybe not for a playoff spot, but there are players that can come up and contribute for a third or fourth line role on a Stanley Cup team. Colton Dock will make the NHL by the end of the year, especially after the trade deadline at the very least. But like, if the Blackhawks needed him in a pinch, they could have him, and he would be a productive player for them. So it's like the prospect pipeline is full. That's the one thing that like hockey has that football doesn't, right? Like there's no like minor league Bears team that you can. We're gonna let Caleb Williams get a season under his belt. It's like you're in or you're cut,
Yep.
and so the future is free agency and the draft.
Yep.
The future is how lucky can you get this off season, not
Right.
how can you build for 5 seasons from now without
Right.
just having players getting frustrated and leaving like a lot of the Bears players have.
Yes. Yes.
So
That is very, very,
or
very true.
or you look at even like the White Sox and the Cubs that have like the White Sox have a good prospect system now only because we traded anybody worth anything to get to accumulate them. We didn't draft them except for Colson Montgomery, but I don't know about the Cubs pipeline. Either way, it's just like
Mhm.
like the Blackhawks have it. It's just one of those sports where it's like you just it's harder to see, and we are where we should be in the rebuild. It was supposed to be a 5-year rebuild when Davidson took over, and we're in year 3 of that. And
And this, you could argue, the middle of a rebuild is the hardest place to be for any sports team, particularly a sports fan, because it's very hard to see the forest through the trees, especially if you're just looking at the standings, the stats, and you're just listening to talking heads on either radio or, God forbid, ESPN talk about hockey every now and again,
right,
which I mean, hockey's on ESPN Plus pretty consistently, but who has ESPN Plus nowadays?
I mean I do, but it's because it comes with my Hulu
Ex
subscription. But I can't
yeah,
watch Blackhawks games on it because I'm blacked out.
of
But I do
course.
like that at least I can watch the rest of the games, you know. But
Mhm.
the other thing too that's really fun as a Blackhawks fan this season, and fun ironically, is that no matter how bad the team it is this year, no matter how disappointing they may have been, by far the worst thing for this team has been the broadcasting rights this offseason because they switched to a regional over the air channel that wasn't available. Mike, I got it for the first time on my TV today
Oh,
because I don't live in Chicago area. But but they were told it was gonna come, and Hulu refuses to reach a deal, and YouTube TV refuses to reach a deal. But I'm still blacked out on ESPN Plus, so it was just waiting until they got the satellite up and running. And here we are, December 22nd, and I got it today, where I can finally watch games. And they only launched an app like about a month ago, because they realized that reaching a deal with Xfinity wasn't going to work. It's like the worst blunder of this year by far was the launching of CHSN Sports Network. Whatever the Blackhawks and the Bulls wind up doing, it's not going to matter because here we are 30 games into the season and I can finally watch games. Now, I've managed to find ways to watch the game, or the places that I work have a DirecTV, which you can get a CHSN on DirecTV, but still, it's just like I haven't been able to sit down and watch a game at home legally.
yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting with the broadcast rights and
Yeah.
everything
And
like that. 'Cause and NBC like NBC Sports shuttered, and that's where watched a lot of Blackhawks games and or
yep.
just hockey in general. And a lot of these regional networks are starting to be a little bit on the fritz. So it's interesting to say the least what's going on there. But I'm glad that you finally get to watch some games and get a chance to actually see what's going on. And speaking of seeing what's going on, so I did mention Connor Bedard. If you just look at the numbers alone, which
Yeah.
I would never recommend anyone just look at numbers alone because there's always more to the story with that. By his standards, he's got 8 goals, 21 assists, 29 points total. So not great, but you said that there's optimism to be had. Explain how so.
He's 19 years old. And not
Ex
only that, barely 19 years old. And he is playing on maybe the worst team in the league, a team with a 12-20 and 2 record. But last year, as mentioned, he managed to win the Rookie of the Year, the Calder Trophy. He managed to do that while being on a line that on any good team should have been a third line. He managed to essentially will himself into being a good player without the proper support. And this season, he's had the proper support, but or at least sometimes he's not necessarily had like a truly like elite playmaker. Like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews entered the league together and just played really well together. And when they were on separate lines, they had the right pairings. Jonathan was with Marian Hossa a lot. Patrick Kane was with Artemi Panarin a lot. So like they had complementary pieces, and Bedard hasn't quite had that yet. It'll be interesting to see who fills that. They brought in Taylor Hall to be that for him, and he was out for the season with an ACL injury, like by November, and the hockey season starts in October. Like 6 weeks into the season, he was out for the rest of it, like 20 games in. So all of a sudden, you had nobody to fill up that role.
Mhm.
So yeah, Bedard still managed to do that. Bedard is a minus 11 goal differential on a bad team. You mentioned he only has 8 goals. He has 21 assists.
That is the number. To me, that's the number that stands out. Like 8 goals this early in the season on a bad team when you pointed out that goal scoring has been an issue, fine, whatever. But looking awfully good from an assist standpoint, we'll give him credit for that.
Here's the other thing, Mike. Let's look at the season stats. He's got 8 goals this season. Luke Richardson was fired December 5th. From October 8th to December 4th, Connor Bedard scored 5 of those 8 goals.
Mhm.
So 3 of those goals have happened between the 12th and 21st, 10 days. So that's the other reason. He had a slow start to a season. There's constantly a sophomore slump between a lot of athletes, NHLers especially, and again, especially when the team is not performing well. He wasn't performing well. People play like defensemen on the other team also just knew if we can stop Connor from scoring, then we can stop everybody scoring. So he had a lot of pressure on him, and he still does. Uh, but still, like he has scored at a much quicker pace, and not only that, but even with assists, since he has what 29 on the year. We said
29 points, 21 assists total.
21 assists. One, two, three, four, five, six, 7 of those assists were since Luke Richardson was fired in the last 10 days. Last 10,
Yeah.
10 days for games. Sorry, 20 days. 20 days.
Yeah.
So his pace has jumped exponentially since. So so that's something you have to look at. And again, he's still not playing with that elite. He doesn't quite have his Marian Hossa yet. He doesn't quite have his Artemi Panarin. Man, if the Blackhawks could make a splash for a big goal scorer, it is not happening. But like if you could put Connor Bedard and Alexander Ovechkin on the same line, they would just dominate the league. Something that is more plausible, but I still think unlikely, is if Mitch Marner signs in Chicago next year and Mitch Marner would play the wing to Connor Bedard. That could be really intriguing. Just take a look at quick NHL pending free agents. That could be some people to play along with him. Let's see, Leon Draisaitl started, Rantanen will sign, Crosby signed. Yeah, Marner could be great. Verhage extended. Brad Marchand has yet to extend. That could be really fun. Let's see, Claude Giroux has been playing wing, I think, for in Ottawa. Claude Giroux could be fun. He's just maybe like a little older to do that. It's and not only that, but again, trades and drafts, and there's always prospects that come out of nowhere. Like a couple of years ago, Brandon Hagel came out of nowhere, and by that year's trade deadline, we got 2 first-round picks and like high-end prospects from Tampa for him. There's always these players that will come. A Jason Dickinson will come along. So look, he's not lighting up the league, but he's on a bad team. He's doing well. It's kind of like when you look at the Bears and you look at Caleb Williams. Now, Caleb Williams is making some very obvious mistakes a lot of times where he should get rid of the ball and he takes a sack instead, or he throws the ball way nowhere near a player, or certainly throws an interception or something like that. But he's it's one of those where you could look and you'd be like, okay, maybe if the Bears would have gotten a new coach instead of Matt Eberflus, we'd be in a lot better position. Or don't blow the Redskins game in the last couple seconds, or don't blow the Vikings game on the block field goal, and don't blow the Green Bay game the way we did. And maybe like confidence is a lot better in the team. So it's one of those where it's like you can look and you can be like, Caleb Williams is still being impressive this year for a first year rookie.
Considering that he is breaking literally every single rookie quarterback
Yes.
record for the Bears, even today in a rather lackluster game against the Lions, there's still some bright spots to see that Caleb Williams looked, by all accounts, pretty good. And also, at the end of the day, it's a team sport. Defense looks terrible right now, and it's the same thing with the Blackhawks. If you look at goal output, Connor Bedard is still third on the team, and there's a lot of people who are just not contributing as much as they probably should at this point.
And if you want to compare his stats to last season, which was good enough for him to win the Calder Trophy with a minus 44 goal differential because the
Right.
team was that bad. He missed a couple games, a couple weeks of games because he got a fractured jaw. He played 68 of the 82 games and scored 22 goals, 39 assists. A third into the season, 34 games, he has 21 assists and 8 goals. If he keeps this same pace, this lackluster pace for the whole season so far that we've been talking about, he will be better than he was last year. But as mentioned, the pace over the last 3 weeks, he could well exceed what he has been doing. So it's and with a minus 11 goal differential instead of a minus 44.
Yeah.
That's more of a team stat than it is a player stat, but still, he is improving. He is nothing to worry about. He is the future of the team that we thought he would be. It'll just be really nice when he gets that complimentary piece because he just doesn't have it, and he doesn't have it consistently. Or it seems like one of those the the people that he's with happen like don't necessarily happen to be the people they thought they were going to be, or at least that perfect complementary piece. Taylor Hall has been really good for Connor Bedard, but imagine what a Mitch Marner would do.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
And so I think you and I could both agree, particularly now, much ado about nothing. This, again, preaching patience, that they're at this point just looking for improvement, right? And by all accounts, there has been improvement, particularly lately, and we'll just wait to see how the rest of the season unfolds, right?
sure. But again, Blackhawks are 12-20-2 as we're recording this.
Mhm.
I don't think their record reflects as badly as that team that records. I don't think it sounds as bad as the team does. Like I said, I think it is still like enough that Richardson should have been fired, but like comparing this to Minnesota, who is 20-10-4 and considered one of the better teams in the league this year, the goals for per game is 2.56 versus 2.91. Our penalty kill average is 85%. Theirs is only 72. Our power play goals for is 22.5%. Theirs is 18%. We are performing better in a lot of their categories, and they're a good team.
Mhm.
The Blackhawks have a lot of the things down, and it again has looked better recently. It's like I said, it's still bad enough that they can that they firing Luke Richardson was the right choice, but it's like similar to the Bears. What is the Bears record now? Four
Four
and
and
nine.
four, it's like 4-12 or 13. Now I'm pretty sure
They're a
13.
better team than 4-13.
Yes, they
Um,
are. Absolutely.
they are more close to like a 4-13 would be 17, right? They're closer to like an 8-18. They were never going to beat the Lions. They were never going to put up a fight against the Lions either game. They are a much better team than their records suggest. Again, a lot of the Blackhawks stuff happens to be from some of the last games since relieving the last head coach. But yeah, it's like I said, the team will get another high draft pick this year. It's going to be a good talent coming up. Probably won't make the NHL this year. But you can get a free agent. You can get somebody who's looking to dump a player contract. You can get a good player to play with Bedard, and as soon as he gets that piece, he's gonna dominate. Like McDavid is arguably to inarguably the best player in the league, but he also has arguably the best winger on his line with Leon Draisaitl. And so McDavid's earned everything that he's had, but Draisaitl has certainly elevated him.
Right,
Um,
right.
and Austin Matthews is great, but he's played his entire career with Mitch Marner and William Nylander, who are great
Mhm.
complementary pieces. Bedard's playing with Taylor Hall and Ilya Mikheyev right now. Who Vancouver just like gave us last year with
Yeah,
like a second round pick.
all the players, all the wingers that you listed are just pretty much interchangeable, right?
Yeah,
They're in terms of quality, in terms of what they bring to elevating the play of a star player, all of that. Yeah, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yep.
clearly. So I think you're right at the beginning when you said it's very tough to be a Chicago sports fan right now. And with the Blackhawks, there's a lot to look forward to. It's just about just wanting to see some semblance of progress during this rebuild. And year three into year four, that's probably the hardest time for a rebuild because
Yep.
a lot of the foundational stuff is has been put into place, and you're just waiting to see when are these bets going to play off or going to pay off. And they're they've a lot of the team has shown flashes, but it's still going to take time, and there's nothing wrong with that. Do
Right,
you?
and you even talk about rebuilds, and you have three teams that are right now going through massive rebuilds, or that are like farther along in a rebuild than Chicago, uh, Detroit, Buffalo, and Detroit, Buffalo, and Montreal are farther along in their rebuild than the Blackhawks. But Detroit has been working on it since like 2014, and haven't made the playoffs in 10 years or 8 years or something like that. And Buffalo has a massive drought, and Buffalo is also like not a small market team, but small enough that people are tired of waiting around, and so they're like trying to go elsewhere. Jack Eichel, the second overall pick, wanted out of Buffalo, so they traded him to Vegas, and he won a Stanley Cup the next year. So those teams are in rebuild hell, and likely won't succeed in their rebuild. Montreal has a better chance, and we have a really good chance because I don't think that the prospect pool was ever as deep and as close together as Buffalo and Detroit were. Because by trading a lot of assets at once, we got a lot of assets at once. Versus, it's not like we got the first overall pick this year and nobody to follow him. But the year before we drafted Connor Bedard, we had three first round picks, and the year that we drafted Bedard, we had three first round picks. Sorry, two. I think two. And then this year we had three first round picks. And next year we're set to have at least two. Like we've got all the draft capital like around Bedard, as opposed to like Lucas Raymond waiting for who's the next guy in Detroit that's going to come help me. Or Dylan Cousins being the only guy who can score in Buffalo, being like, when are you going to get me some help? So just that endless cycle in those teams. So yeah, and you're right. As a Chicago sports fan, man, it's rough. I have hope for the Blackhawks. I have hope for the Bears. I'm less sure about when the Bears are going to turn it around, but I got to think soon, and a lot will depend on their coach. I think the Blackhawks more depends on the GM, but certainly the coach is not an overlooked site. At least the Cubs are trying something. I have no faith in the White Sox to ever be good again until Jerry sells the team. But still, it's one of those where it's like it's tough being a fan right now. But we are going to be so annoying in 5 years.
Yeah, that's very, very true. What are you looking forward or like can you give me some highlights or things that you've been excited for or anything that you're looking forward to the rest of the year for the Blackhawks?
Oh boy, yeah. I look. I'm excited to see how trade deadline plans out, and I'm excited to see how the offseason plays
Mhm.
out. I'm excited to see. I want us to be competitive, but I also still want us to have a top five pick next year. At this point, a third of the season, I'd like to get another forward, another person with scoring capability. But I'm excited to see a lot of the prospects get the call up from Rockford to see because especially at trade deadline, we're going to trade Alec Martinez. We're likely to trade Taylor Hall. It's less certain. There's certainly a couple guys that we are in a good position to trade for prospects or capital, and there's players that are ready to come up. I'm really excited to see Artem Levshinov, the number two overall pick last year. Excited to see him. I'm excited to see Colton Dock and Landon Slaggert, as mentioned earlier. And these guys are going to be good. I'm really curious to see how the Blackhawks handle next year free agency. Do they go out and try to get the number one guy? The Blackhawks also last season tried really hard to get Jake Gensel, who was like one of the most coveted free agents that signed before unrestricted free agency. They barely lost out of it, and the Blackhawks tried really hard to get Martin Necas as well. They just weren't willing to offer what Carolina wanted for him because he was a little bit of a gamble. So like the Blackhawks are trying, and like I mentioned, they tried really hard to get Ivan Demidov to get the pick to get him at least. Like pretty soon they're gonna make that splash. Like if you remember in 2009 when we signed Marian Hossa, who had the years before played on Detroit and Pittsburgh Stanley Cup Finals competing teams, making that splash and making the splash to sign coveted free agent prospect Artemi Panarin. They need to make a huge signing too, because Teravainen and Bertuzzi were not small signings, but we need a Marner signing, or we need to like offer sheet somebody a stupid contract. That'd be really, really fun. Mikko Rantanen is, I think, still technically UFA. I don't think that's gonna work out, but still, it's like I'm really excited to see like the Blackhawks have some money to spend, and I really want to see who they choose to do it. But man, I'm excited to see these prospects play out. I wonder if Sam Renzel, after he finishes his season in Minnesota, if he signs an NHL contract, because that would be really fun to see. Yeah, I mean, like there's so much to be excited for, and like I mentioned, there's several players that we've drafted that aren't even signed that are going to in theory be key pieces, if not like core Stanley Cup teams, then at least like some more depth players, or at least holding down the prospect pipeline in Rockford while the Blackhawks get it done, and then when they get their chance, they'll come up and make their place known.
Do you have any just general NHL thoughts, sans Blackhawks, that anything that you've been excited to see or anything in particular from the NHL that you want to mention?
Oh boy, the NHL is doing a four nation face off this year, which is cool. That's exciting. It is a Blackhawks things, but I'm always excited for the Winter Classic. But the Blackhawks jerseys look spectacular, and they'll be playing at Wrigley Field on December 31st. Outdoor games are always fun. The NHL is going back to the Olympics. It's been a while since they've been. I'm excited to see that happening.
It's what, 2026, right?
26, yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while since that's happened. There's just a lot of things to be positive about around the league.
Can I ask
Yeah,
you about something in particular?
sure.
Utah Hockey Club,
Yeah,
yay or nay, in terms of just staying with Hockey Club as a name as opposed to Utah Yeti or whatever they end up becoming.
I go back and forth on this because I didn't like the name at first, but it's grown on me. I don't want them to keep it only because it is so out there, so different. Like I really like the idea if they were to pick something. Everybody loves the Yeti as this thing. It's not going to happen, but I would love for them to be the Storm and Mormon. But I saw something that said that they should call themselves the Utah Jazz, because I think it's the same owners from the basketball
From the
team.
actual Jazz, yeah. The
Yeah,
Jazz
and it's one of
basketball
those
team.
things where it's like the Utah Jazz relocated from St. Louis, if I'm not mistaken, which is why
No,
they're
no, the Utah Jazz relocated from New Orleans, where
okay.
that would make a whole lot of sense for the New Orleans Jazz to be there, but then they moved to Utah.
Yeah. No,
For
that's why I think
reason.
somebody suggested that they should also be the Jazz just because it makes equally less sense as the Utah Jazz basketball team.
Right.
But also on 32 Thoughts, which if you're new to hockey or whatnot, it's like the go-to hockey podcast. Elliot Friedman, who's like the number one sports insider for hockey, somebody was saying how somebody brought up the case where he's like, when you think of soccer clubs, it's not mascots, it's Chelsea and Manchester and all these. And he's like, what if Utah just stuck with hockey club because we're like they're choosing to identify as the Utah Hockey Club just the same way that Chelsea identifies as Chelsea. And I'm like, I like that. It's growing on me, but I do think that like because even Montreal Canadiens, Like their logo is HC because it's the Canadians Hockey Club, even though they don't refer to themselves as the hockey club anymore. It's just the Canadians. But even then, like they're Canadians, and Vancouver's the Canucks. They're Canadians.
Canadian, yeah, just
So
another way to say Canadian. Yeah.
so like it's a I love the idea of them doing that. It would just that I would want more teams to do that. So if unless other teams are also willing to do that, and I don't think that they should. I think they should pick a logo and a team name. Maybe maybe if the NHL started another league, like when they started the PWHL, the Women's Hockey League, maybe they could have just been like the Milwaukee Hockey Club or whatever. But to implement that change in the league seems it's always these one of these things is not like the other.
It also doesn't help that the last two teams to join the NHL had fantastic names, the Kraken and the Golden Knights.
I mean, I'm
Uh,
not the biggest fan of the Golden Knights name or
it,
even logo
but
for that matter, and I
but
love the
it,
Kraken name and logo.
but Golden Knights fits so well with Vegas.
Sure, it fits so well because they really made it their identity and built a culture around that name.
Yeah,
So
overall, it's a pretty blah name, but
yeah, that's what
it
I mean.
fits.
Like they've
Yeah. Oh
embraced
yeah.
it and they've ran with it, and it's been awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm even thinking of like relocated teams that have just been better since relocating. Just, I mean, simply Minnesota North Stars going down to just Dallas Stars is way better, way cleaner.
Yeah.
Calgary Flames just sounds better than Atlanta Flames. Winnipeg Jets over they were the Atlanta team as well.
Atlanta was it
Um,
Thrashers, I think that's
Thrashers, yes,
what they
Thrashers, the
were
Min
called.
Jets. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I kind of like the Thrashers, but but still,
Still waiting for hockey to go back to Hartford. Hartford Whalers.
yep.
Miss that.
I
And
yeah, so I don't I think that don't be the oddball out. Just like pick something and be cool. But I don't know. Nothing that I've seen so far has blown me away. But yeah,
any other sports anything that sports hot takes you want to get off your chest?
you know what? I'll give my one White Sox take here. I've
All
already
right.
said the White Sox will not be good as long as Jerry owns the team. I have a sneaky suspicion, and Robert and I talked a little bit about this. And I know that we can't really call winners or losers yet. But I have a sneaky suspicions that the White Sox won the Garrett Crochet trade to the Red Sox.
Yeah,
I think a lot
I
of people think it's pretty even, but there's a lot of
mm,
potential for it to swing either way because Garrett Crochet is an established good NHL pitcher. Sorry, an established MLB pitcher who has played a really good season on a really bad team. And the White Sox got three really promising
re-
prospects who Robert thought really highly of, so that makes me think really highly of them.
that's a good sign. Very much so.
Um, my problem is that Garrett Crochet is 22 or 23 years old, and he has had one MLB season under his belt. So who knows if that was just a fluke, and people just didn't have enough film to study him. But he's also 22 or 23 years old, and a couple years ago had Tommy John surgery. So I just wonder, like at his best, is he Jacob DeGrom, where he's really good when he's healthy, but he misses entire seasons at a time? I wonder. It could very well wind up being like the Chris Sale trade, where Chris Sale just wound up being really good for them, and like it seems very reminiscent of that. But and Robert mentioned he was very nervous about it as well, and if you're asking me to put odds on it, it's not a bad deal for the Red Sox to make. I'm just worried about Crochet's health and consistency because he hasn't proven it yet. He hasn't, and the White Sox were right to ask high on him. But unfortunately, I'm thrilled that they sold him, and I wish they would have sold him earlier at the trade deadline because I've always just been so worried that he's just gonna fall off a cliff in stats next year, and or he's going to hurt himself really bad again. What if he winds up being Steven Strasburg, another really promising young pitcher that had Tommy John surgery early and just
It's
recovered,
never
but had it
Yep.
again, and just like we could be talking about as in the same way that we talk about Shohei Ohtani, except Strasburg wasn't a hitter, but still like could have been a generational pitcher and certainly had the talent, but
Just that's that's just the nature of sports, right? We don't have crystal balls. We can't see into the future, and we can't see
Yeah.
the effects that injuries and setbacks will have on an individual. Because
And look, if you're the Red Sox, you gotta try, right? You gotta take that move. It's just one of those where I know Robert was concerned about it too. I am very concerned about his health and consistency.
and it's a little cynical to say, well, not your problem anymore, but as a fan of the game, nonetheless. And he was a bright spot for an otherwise dismal team last
And
year.
and I want him to be great because I want somebody to trade really high for Lewis Robert Jr., who has also struggled with staying healthy. But when he's healthy, he's incredible. And I love him, but he's not in our window. So somebody's gonna overpay for him, and he's gonna miss 60 games a season. So yeah.
Well, suffice to say, there's optimism to be had for the Blackhawks. There is something to be said about the White Sox, and then the Bears. It's kind of a coin flip right now, so we'll wait and see. But Aaron, always great to have you on. Always great to talk hockey with you as well. I don't have enough hockey fans in my life, so I appreciate you coming on and talking about it and showing your enthusiasm for a game that is just in need of just more enthusiastic people at this point.
I yeah, I don't think I could always do this. The people that have to watch all these games and report on them and everything. It's abysmal sometimes, but especially now that I can actually get CHSN, maybe I'll actually catch some more full games, be able to sit down and watch them and be more influenced in what I'm saying, be more justified in the things that but I listen to a lot of sports podcasts about the Blackhawks, and everybody is optimistic about the future, not this season. Nobody has ever been optimistic about this season.
No, no, but
So,
that's okay. It's it's part of the rebuild. It's part of the process. You just got to trust it. Uh, so thank you again. Where can the people find you? And do you have anything that you want to plug?
I'll just plug the SiftPop Writers Room podcast where I have some guests from SiftPop.com join me to help me cross movies on my watch list. And then I'll just plug that, and you can find other places that you want to follow me if you listen to that.
Well, good stuff. I would be remiss not to recommend the writer's room as well because I'm on it from time to time too. So looking forward to jumping on that with you, talking some TV, and then talking about a fun season of TV that we have coming up to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks again, and I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.